Let's talk about Duke, baby. Let's talk about MSG. Let's talk about all the offense and the defense and shooting threes. Let's talk about Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by FanDuel. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. This is your team every day, no matter what. I am bringing you Baylor athletics content every day of the work week, and it's not coming from Baylor University. We're the only ones that can say that. So appreciate you joining once again. Today, we're talking about the big one, the one that I personally have been waiting for a long time. And I know for you Baylor fans have been waiting for a long time for the two of us, very different reasons. Baylor, Duke, Madison Square Garden, one of the great programs of the last 5 years, and Duke squaring off. This is an interesting one. It is... is it an interesting one? Because Baylor comes off a 24-point loss to Michigan State, and they need this one bad. Because people, idiots, me, are saying, well, Baylor didn't play anybody to get to 9-0, and they play somebody, and they get their doors blown off. Now they get somebody again. Duke, New York City, 5 days before Christmas. Bring it on, baby. Bring it on. I have wanted this matchup for the last 5 years now. I just kept thinking, man, Baylor has been better than Duke. Like, we need to match up with them. I want to beat Duke. I could have said the same thing about Carolina. We lost. Bad matchup. But I want to get these blue bloods in here that aren't Kansas. It's great playing Kansas, but we want to face some of these other blue bloods, and Duke is that, and they are up and down this season. Not as much down as Michigan State was before Baylor played them, but they've lost 3 or 4 games. They lost 2 in a row. That's about 2 weeks ago now, where they lost to Arkansas down at Bud Walton, who, look, great coach and Eric Musselman, but that's a team that's still not in the rankings. And then lost to Georgia Tech in Atlanta. A bad loss for John Shire and Duke. But still solidly a top 25 team. I think they're 21 right now, and certainly will get higher than that throughout this season. And the one guy I'm looking at more than any other is Kyle Filipowski. The kid is so good. I know you didn't need me to tell you that, but I mean, this kid was just projected to be just outside of the lottery last year in last year's NBA draft, and he kind of shocked everyone by saying, well, you know what, then I'll come back. And as a sophomore, he has been just different, man. 18-9 every day. I mean, in the ACC at Duke, that's big numbers, right? And for a kid who can put the ball on the floor at the center position in Filipowski, and he has added the ball movement too. In 10 games this year, he has 30 assists. 3 a game, that's not bad, man. That's not bad for your center. That's actually pretty good, because last year he had just 56 total. In 36 games, he had 56 assists. He's got 30 in 10 this year. This kid is NBA written all over him. He is a great off the ball as well. He is one of the best cutters in the nation. We'll talk a little bit about how to go after him in the next segment, but this is the guy to key on, Filipowski. He can shoot it a little bit too. He can shoot from outside. So that's the guy that it all goes through for Duke. And it was the case last year too. And he's only polishing his game at this point. Like, for all that we say about these guys who come back and are gonna make their game better for the NBA, only about half of them actually do that. We said it about Matthew Meyer. It didn't happen. Kyle Filipowski, it's happening. It's happening right now. But one guy Duke is missing right now as we record this the night before the game, but could have back as a game time decision, is Tyrese Proctor. Another sophomore, which is like basically being a fifth-year senior at Duke in terms of experience. He's their point guard, and he is another one who took an even bigger step up this year. He was a stud last year as a freshman. He was playing 30 minutes a game, but this year, 10-5, 10 points, 5 assists every night. I'll take that from my point guard any day of the week. And all of his efficiency numbers have gone up, all of them. And as a team, this is not the Duke team that you might remember from 10 years ago, say, where they were the first ones who were really high volume 3-point shooters. Krzyzewski's Duke teams. I'm mainly looking at like those late aughts, early 2010s. John Shire, their head coach right now, was the epitome of that. He was the point guard and actually the 2 guard for a little bit when Nolan Smith kind of took the reins there. It was just a knockdown shooter. And they were that team that was like, if they're not hitting their threes, they're not going to win. They were that classic, like Sweet 16 or Final Four type of team, depending on how the threes go in. Before that was cool. Before that was every level of basketball. That's what Duke was doing. And what's funny is when that shift came, specifically in the NBA with Steph Curry and the Warriors, it started to go the other way for Duke. They became obviously this great one and done program, and to their detriment, weren't a great 3-point shooting team. I mean, they had, I think back to 2019 with Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett, they were the best 2-point shooting team in the nation by far. But they couldn't stretch a defense. And so defenses collapsed on them all the time. And they're now a bit of a hybrid of that. They're not shooting from as volume as high as Baylor. And they don't shoot it as well as Baylor. They're 37% from 3, which is pretty solid. Baylor shoots 42%. So it doesn't look that great, but it is. It's pretty good. But one thing that has struggled for Duke is the ball movement. So Tyrese Proctor went out with a sprained ankle against Georgia Tech. Again, that was about 2.5 weeks ago, and he's still a game time decision. They don't know. He's missed the 2 games that they won against mid-major opponents. So they don't know if he'll be ready in time for this game tonight against Baylor. But that has hurt them in terms of ball movement. They're 48th in the country in assists. For a team that has a starting point guard as efficient as Tyrese Proctor, that's not where they should be in that number. And that's because he's been hurt. And so that has really taken a dent on their kind of offensive approach. But I think where Baylor has an advantage is the perimeter defending. Which is funny to say because Duke is still a very good defensive team. They're actually 16th in KenPom, which is higher than what Michigan State was going into that last game. And Michigan State obviously crushed Baylor. But I think out on the perimeter, Baylor's going to win on both sides, 3-point shooting and 3-point defending. And there are some other ways that they can attack Duke. And of course, there are some ways that Duke can attack Baylor. But that is the look at the guys or guy to keep your attention to. So if Tyrese Proctor plays, we'll see if he's even close to 100% and how that affects Duke. But Filipowski can beat you on both ends and both inside and outside. But there are some ways to get after him and the Blue Devils. We'll talk about that after this quick word from our friends at FanDuel. Yes, I am talking about FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. My favorite one to play because they make it so darn easy. And if you don't believe me, as that is a good reason to go over to FanDuel, how about this? Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, this is the time. Okay, that deal, we've got all these sports going on right now. It's bowl season, college basketball, NBA, NHL, NFL coming up on those playoff seedings. And you're going to be done with fantasy like next week. So here we go. This is time to get in on FanDuel and see what they've got. They've got spreads, player props, over-unders, anything you can think of. FanDuel.com/locked-on, okay? That's going to get you the deal. If you're a new customer, $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's at FanDuel.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions do apply. So now you know a little bit about Duke. And how does Baylor exploit Duke a little bit? There are some ways. This is a really evenly matched game. If the Michigan State game never happened, I probably would have gone with the same swagger into that game that I had for Baylor going into this one as well, saying Baylor was going to win by double digits. But we saw Baylor get exposed a little bit on Saturday. Absolutely. And I'm willing to flush that one from the memory banks if they can put a great effort out tonight and beat Duke, quite frankly. If they beat them, I'll forget the Michigan State game entirely. You have my word for that. Not that I won't bring it up, but I won't hold it against them. Okay? You have my word on that. But right now, as I look at it, these are two teams who just, like I said, I mean, just evenly matched, and they can both exploit each other. And so I'm going to look at Filipowski for Duke. Can't say enough good things about the guy. He's going to be a lottery pick. I think his game is actually going to translate to the NBA, which isn't always the case with 7-foot centers in college basketball anymore. I'm looking at Zach Edey, which hasn't happened yet, but that's not going to transition to the NBA very well. Luka Garza, I don't even know where he's playing. He was the number one player in college basketball 2 years in a row. It's just not a position that translates to the NBA like it used to from the college game. You can't just be a post-up guy, and Filipowski is not that. I mentioned it earlier. He is one of the best cutters, off-ball centers in the entire nation. Now, there is something that he still struggles with, and I think this was probably the main reason why he decided to come back to college for a second year, was because last year he struggled against big physical centers. And that is something you just can't replicate in training camp or anything like that. You have got to beef up and be ready physically to go into the NBA. And I think that was his problem. He had a skill set, but he wasn't physically ready to go to the NBA. And so good move on him coming back, but he has still struggled with that. So Yves Missi, Josh Ojonmuna, they're going to need to bang with him a little bit, to the point where I think you might see Jalen Bridges and Caleb Lohner even on him a little bit and getting some reps covering Filipowski. Because what's different about him, kind of what I was mentioning with the cutting, is you have to run more with him than you do with other centers. You know, you have to hand in his shirt, because he can shoot too. Put a hand in his shirt at any part of the floor. It cannot be a one-man job with how physically demanding it will be to just bang with him all night. And so that will be a good test for Missi and Ojonmuna, who have shown flashes of great defense, especially Ojonmuna, last year included, but haven't quite gotten an assignment quite like Filipowski. And I think that this will be a great test of Scott Drew's game plan on him, and how these guys will be able to hold up against big physical big men in the Big 12, unlike what Baylor was able to do with Flo Thamba last year. So I am excited to see that, to go at him physically, defensively. And he's not one of the guys I would circle to attack on the defensive end, like when Baylor's on the offense. But overall, Duke, with as good as their defense has been, they've struggled keeping teams off the free throw line. They're in the bottom half of the ACC in both 3-point defense and free throws allowed. So they just don't really get into a defensive rhythm without fouling. Like they don't go a couple possessions of straight stops because they're putting guys at the free throw line. That's something that I thought Baylor struggled with from an offensive standpoint last year. Of they would go too long without scoring, and it begged the question of, why isn't someone just attacking the freaking basket and getting to the free throw line? That was a big problem last year, and they played outside a little bit too much. I think the signs are there early in this season that should not be an issue. They have shot a good bit of free throws. They haven't shot them all that well so far, but they don't play exclusively on the perimeter, even though they're a good 3-point shooting team. They'll play inside and out on you. And with that, I just see more of an advantage for Baylor in this matchup than it would have been last year. I think they can get to the free throw line. I think they can score consistently. And I think offensively, that was a bit of an anomaly out there on Saturday. Jury's still out on the defense. Again, it's shown up in flashes, but shouldn't see that bad an offensive performance as you did on Saturday. This is still, even after that loss, they're still the number 2 team in adjusted offense for KenPom. And the problem was just giving up the ball, man. Giving up the ball. And so I think a key factor in tonight's game is someone who's going to be a key factor for Baylor all season long, maybe the biggest factor. He's not the most talented player. He's not going to lead the team in points, but they will go as Ray J. Dennis goes. And he turned the ball over, 6 or 7 times on Saturday. Jaden Nunn wasn't that much better as the backup point guard. And they turned it over a total of 21 times. This might be a bold take to some. What if they go 20-plus turnovers against Duke? They will not win the game. They will not score more points than Duke if they turn it over 21 times or even 15 times, to be quite honest. They gotta secure the basketball because there are ways to go at this team. While it is a good defense, there are ways to go at them. I mentioned the three-point defense. So time to get back on track, guys, with the three-point shooting. You shoot 42% from the three-point land for the year. This is not a great three-point defensive team in Duke. In fact, where they have been really susceptible is the corner three. Corner three, as Peter Griffin would say. Jalen Bridges, I'm looking at you. I've looked for the premier performance. Haven't seen it so far this year. That's okay. The season's still young. I'm not doubting you, but this is your time, buddy. You love the corner three. Shoot corner threes in the NBA. All the scouts are going to see it in an NBA arena. They're going to love it. That's where you could get at Duke, is that corner three. So please go after that. Please go after that some more. And to go back to the Jaden Nunn point, I didn't think he had a good game at all on Saturday against Michigan State, but I think he has had a pretty solid season so far. And one thing Baylor hasn't really had since Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler, now going on 3 years ago, is two guys who can really run the offense. The next year, James Akinjo was the guy. He was the only one running the point. You even saw at one point when he was hurt, you saw Jeremy Sohan doing it. So they didn't have a ton of options there. Last year, it was Keontae George. And the team was so much different offensively when he wasn't out there because Adam Flagler wasn't a point guard. He's a two guard. And so this year, if Jaden Nunn can be, it doesn't need to be an All-American, doesn't need to be an All-Big 12, but a serviceable backup point guard, that can open up a lot for Baylor, specifically because both Ray J and Jaden Nunn can be good shooters, especially Ray J can be a good outside shooter. So it again makes this offense less predictable the more ball handlers they have. So I don't know that Baylor has a huge advantage, nor does Duke. I really think they're that evenly matched. But just looking at the full picture here, Baylor has 6 guys that average in double figures. If Duke doesn't have a good game from Kyle Filipowski, they're in real trouble. Granted, he has good games every night. But you can't really say that about Baylor with Jacoby Walter. They've won games where he's had bad nights. Yves Missi, they've done the same. Jalen Bridges, they've won games where he hasn't had great nights. They've even won games where Ray J. Dennis hasn't had great nights. I didn't think that Auburn game was all that great, and they ended up winning that game. So it's going to take a big effort coming after a loss, and you're going to be in a road environment again. I know there are people who were saying, oh, Michigan State, that was a road game. Yeah, of course it was. And I know it seems neutral on paper for this game tonight, but it is not. MSG is Cameron North. It is going to be filled to the tilt with Duke fans. They're going to be there in full force. I mean, that is where the alumni come from. Duke might as well be called LIU Durham, okay? It is New York's favorite school. And that's where their huge alumni base is. And they do really well there. By the way, they've won 69, very nice, 69% of their games at MSG, including their last 6 there. They love playing at Madison Square Garden. Baylor, on the other hand, hasn't even done that in 7 years, since they lost to South Carolina in the Sweet 16 back in 2017. So it will be a road environment. It'll be against another good team, one that is obviously nailed on for the tournament, which hasn't been the case with many of Baylor's opponents so far, and it will be marquee. The nation will be watching. And it's my sincere hope that Baylor gets that bounce-back game and is able to show the country that they are for real, that they are still national championship contenders. Because I'm ready to believe again. I really am. And I'm also ready to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. Look, going to find people to work for your small business, it's just not an easy thing to do, right? I mean, running a small business in general is not an easy thing to do, but that's why LinkedIn Talent Solutions helps you. And that's why 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. It isn't like any other job board, okay? It's got more than 1 billion people in their network. And that's why it's the best place to find candidates. They know what small businesses are doing. They know that they're wearing too many hats and they don't have the time and the resources to go through all of this like they need to. So with LinkedIn, that process is intuitive, it's quick, it's easy. They have you write your own job descriptions. They've got things like some filler questions for people to fill out so that they can get you the qualified candidates that you need. So you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. So this is the second all-time meeting between the Baylor Bears and the Duke Blue Devils. And I think we all remember the first. Scott Drew was coaching for Baylor. Current Duke coach Jon Scheyer was running the point for the Blue Devils. It was in Houston at NRG Stadium back in March of 2010. It was the Elite Eight. Of course, that means winner goes to the Final Four. And it is, in some ways, a watershed moment in Baylor basketball history. And have they won the game, spoiler alert, they did not, it would have been probably the biggest win in the history of the program. Okay, so let's take you back there. Baylor's on this great run, first of 2 Elite Eight runs in 3 years for Scott Drew. They've got Lace Dunn, they've got Tweety Carter, they got Quincy AC. They are stacked, really. And then it comes to number 1 seed Duke Blue Devils. This is a senior-laden team with guys you don't even remember. Jon Scheyer, Lance Thomas, Nolan Smith, Kyle Singler, the Plumlee brothers, who are still playing in the NBA or coming off the bench for that Duke team. And at center, from Haddonfield, New Jersey, 7'1", Brian Zubek. We'll come back to him later. Now, I got to admit something to you guys. Now, those of you who know me will already know this about me, but I was watching that game back in March of 2010 at my home in Rockland, Massachusetts, and I was watching with an intent eye. I was really into this game because I was the biggest Duke Blue Devil basketball fan you could have met at the time. My dad went to Duke. There's a reason you get the name Cameron, baby. I was obsessed with Duke basketball growing up. Every loss just cut into me so hard. I mean, if I had a post-game show on a Locked On Blue Devils when I was 12 years old, they would have sent the police to my house to make sure I hadn't committed suicide. Like, I was so into Duke basketball. And I will also say this, complete honesty, hand to the Bible here. That game in 2010 against Baylor was the lowest I had felt as a Duke fan during a game that Duke ended up winning. Like, I had no hope that they were going to win the game even into the second half. I mean, that Baylor team was running them off the court. That was a really good Duke team, especially defensively, but they were a great half-court team. And Baylor ran all over them. That was something that they just didn't run into, Duke. They go on to win the national championship. They beat the Cinderella story Butler, which was like the same kind of team. Half-court, slow, obviously very effective and very good defensively. But they did not face anyone other than Baylor that was going to exploit them. In fact, they got really lucky that in that same Elite Eight round, West Virginia, led by current Celtics coach Joe Mazzulla, ended up beating Kentucky, John Wall's Kentucky team, John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, because I think that team could have beaten Duke by 15 points in the Final Four. But Baylor just didn't have it for a full 40 minutes, but they just played their guts out, man. And looking back on it now, just such an important game in the history of that program. Upstart Scott Drew. I mean, this is really the first time Scott Drew won a tournament game. You know, in 2008, they make the tournament for the first time in 20 years. The next year, they're back in the NIT and losing the final. And then all of a sudden, 2010, they're playing in front of a home crowd in Houston to go to the Final Four, to beat Mike Krzyzewski, almighty Duke. It would have been the biggest win in Baylor basketball history. And they had it. They had it until they didn't. The guy who was most critical to that Duke team in 2010, not the best player, but the most critical, was Brian Zubak, 7'1" center who for 3.5 seasons at Duke with plenty of playing time didn't quite put it all together. He's never a great offensive player, back to the basket guy, and he could get bullied a little bit. But that second half of 2010, he became an offensive rebounding machine. And like I talked about earlier with their high volume 3-point shooting, this was the first of those teams that really thrived on three-pointer. It's either going in or I'm going to miss it. And if I miss it, Brian Zubak is going to get a rebound and kick it back out to someone to hit a three. They were devastating at that. And so with a couple minutes left in the game, under 5 minutes left, Quincy Acey's going to the basket. Brian Zubak steps ahead of him. They make contact. They hit the floor. The call is a charge. Brian Zubak stays in the game with 4 fouls, would have knocked him out. And whereas Baylor had a couple possession lead there, Duke goes on a 15-3 run to end the game and see the Bears out and go to the Final Four in Indianapolis and win the national championship. It's still one of the most bitter losses, if not the most bitter loss in Baylor men's basketball history. What that would have done for the program to go to the Final Four. Look, we've turned out okay. We've got a national championship more recently than they do, but it's devastating for Baylor fans. And if you ask the Baylor fans that were there or were watching that day, it still hurts for them to talk about it. I can hear it in their voice. I've talked to people about it. It is not dissimilar to the way my dad talks about the 1986 World Series Game 6 when the Red Sox had a 2-run lead and were 1 strike away from winning the World Series and inexplicably did not. That's what it sounds like. And at the time, I was like, yeah, baby, Duke, Final Four. That's what they do. They draw charges and they win games late. And I've looked back at the tape. And maybe it helps that I'm doing Locked On Baylor and I'm wearing a Baylor shirt and a Baylor hat and a Baylor room. But that was a charge, man. I've never said it in public. Sorry. That was a block. Thought I had you guys there for a second. That was a block. I've never said it in public. That was a block. 10 times out of 10. He's too late to get there. He just is. He's not the fleetest of foot. But that was a block. And Baylor still needs to finish the job in that game, but that's a huge difference. The X factor for this Duke team would have been out of the game. Baylor would have won that game. Absolutely. They would have gone to the Final Four. I don't know what happens there, but they would have gone to the Final Four for the first time since 1950. And we could have seen that national championship in 2014 or 2015, and then maybe again in 2021. That's how much this program would have ascended. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I have a feeling I know what you guys are going to say. Was it a block? Was it a charge? Would that have been the greatest win in Baylor history? Is Baylor going to win tonight? I'd love to know your score predictions down in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe and share. I am so freaking excited for this game tonight. It is personal for me, and I know for a lot of you as well. Let's go out there and beat Duke and be a top 5 team again. And then we'll talk about it tomorrow with a full recap on Locked On Baylor.